Welcome back. Today we're going to be looking at making one of these. This is a beginner level woodworking project, so regardless of the skill level you're at, feel free to follow along. Now I don't recommend doing this lightning part as it is very dangerous. Nevertheless, I will show my process on that for entertainment purposes. As far as tools, I will be using a bandsaw, though you can use anything that you can get straight cuts with. Table saw, jigsaw, circular saw, etc. I will be using a scroll saw, a random orbital sander with grits 40, 120, and 240, belt sander for saving time on sanding. If you don't have one, you can get away with just a random orbital sander. Spindle sander, if you don't have one of those, you can get away with hand sanding if you don't mind spending some extra time on that. Drill with 3/4 inch and 5/16 inch bits, a router with a 45-degree bit, and you can simulate that part with a random orbital sander if you don't have a router. A wood clamp or a bench vise to hold the sword, tape measure and pencil, and safety glasses. As far as materials, we will of course need the wood. I prefer 1 inch thick, but it needs to be at least 54 inches long and 3.5 inches wide. You need wood glue or resin, 1/4 inch wood dowels, and optional is resin and mica powder for filling in the lightning like I did, and adding a sort of resin pommel jewel. So with that, let's go ahead and get down to it. Starting out, we'll cut our board into more manageable pieces. We'll need 3 pieces. 8 inch by 3.5 inch for the handle, the 7 inch by 3.5 inch for the crossguard, and 40 inch by 2.5 inch for the blade. If you want to skip this part of the video and just measure out those sizes on your own, I've added chapters for you to easily skip to the next part. Now we'll cut these blocks out on our bandsaw, and remember this step is just to make the blocks a more manageable size to work with. We'll draw the lines for more detailed cuts in the next step. If you would like to use the same design for the crossguard and the handles that I am, take a screenshot of these and size them appropriately in a free image sizing software like GIMP. Alternatively, feel free to draw up your own design. After printing and cutting these out of paper with scissors, I'll use them as a stencil for drawing the lines before we cut them out on the scroll saw. If you would like to add a colored resin jewel to the crossguard like I am, you can measure out the center and mark it to be drilled in the next step. And remember, if you don't feel like dealing with resin, this step is completely optional. Feel free to leave it out and you will still end up with a fantastic looking sword. For the blade of the sword, we'll measure out 37 inches along the length. Then on the edge closest to that mark, we'll mark at 1.25 inches width for the tip of the sword. In line with the 37 inch mark, we'll mark at 0.25 inches width and 2.25 inches width. Then, draw lines between the dots connecting the mark at the tip of the sword with the 2 marks made at the 37 inch mark, as well as connecting the 2 37 inch marks to the corners at the far end of the wood away from the tip of the sword. With those lines drawn, it should look something like this. Next, we'll be drilling the holes. If you are not doing the resin jewel in the crossguard, only drill the hole in the handle. It is important to do the drilling before we cut out the final shape, as the final shape would be likely to break under the pressure of drilling. I like to drill until the tip of my spade bit shows through the other side, and then flip it over and use that hole as a guide to finish drilling. This prevents chip out and just makes the piece look more clean. For the resin jewel, I'll put 3 pieces of packaging tape on the back to hold the resin in, making sure to press each one down firmly to avoid leakage. Since I'll be doing this sword in 2 colors, red on one side and blue on the other, I'll only mostly fill it with red resin, and once it cures, I'll fill it up the rest of the way with blue resin. We'll cut these out on the scroll saw as it allows us to deftly navigate these tight corners. If you haven't used a scroll saw before, be prepared to apply a lot of downward force on the piece to keep it in place, as the scroll saw will try to violently shake it if you allow it to. With my particular crossguard design, the wings are a bit weak, so to avoid exposing them to the forces of the scroll saw, I leave the tips of the outer wings uncut. We'll sand them into shape later. Also, don't expect it to look good quite at this stage. Patience is key here. Trust the process and you'll love the result. Remember, I'm using the belt sander to save time, but if you don't have one, using a random orbital sander is perfectly fine. I'm using the spindle sander here to get in the tight corners that my other sanders can't quite reach. If you don't have one, just grab a piece of sandpaper and do this part by hand. For the handle and crossguard, I'll add a slight 45-degree edge to them. For the crossguard, notice how I stopped right in the dips on either side of where the blade and handle will be. In my opinion, it looks better if you leave those edges untouched. Also, the router is aggressive enough that I don't want to get too close to the tips of the outer wings, so I'll just sand a 45-degree edge for them later.
System of failure.
I will also leave the part of the handle that meets the crossguard untouched. Now we'll gently sand the outer wings down to a point, making sure to rock it back and forth to keep a smooth curve. We'll sand the handle and crossguard with our random orbital sander, starting with 40 grit, then 120 grit, and ending with 240 grit. Important things to remember are to keep the sander moving, don't linger in one place. Be thorough with each grit before moving on to the next grit. Also, don't forget to sand a 45-degree edge for the tips of the outer wings. Now we're ready to move on to the blade, which we'll cut on the bandsaw according to the lines we drew earlier. We'll smooth out the edges with some sanding. Next, we'll route out a 45-degree edge for the blade. Make sure to get a deeper cut on this piece than we did for the handle. Sanding the blade is pretty straightforward, just be sure to follow my tips from sanding the handle. Now we're on to my favorite part, electrocuting the wood. Now I would highly advise against doing this part at home as it is very dangerous. However, for the curious minds out there, I will explain what we've got going on here. So this is an oil burning transformer that I got from eBay. I wired up a simple power cord to the input, 120 volts, and 2 metal clamps to the output. It puts out a whopping 10,000 volts and 23 milliamps. To allow it to go across the wood, we've got a solution of 1 tablespoon baking soda dissolved in 1 cup of water, which we call the electrolyte solution. Applying it liberally to the wood allows the current to go across in the fractal burn pattern. Let's check it out.
Excellent.
Generally, it is not recommended to get wood wet, but it is a necessary evil as part of the Lichtenburg Fractal Burning process is to clean the carbon out of the burns. I use a simple plastic wire brush. The metal ones tend to leave scratch marks in the wood. We'll let the wood dry under pressure so that it doesn't warp. The baking soda from the electrolyte solution reacts with the tannins in the wood to create this burnt color we see here. To bring back that nice red color, we'll apply oxalic acid. I dissolve 2 tablespoons in 1 cup of water and scrub it into the wood with the plastic brush. Of course, we'll clamp it down here as well to avoid warping. We'll wash out the oxalic acid as it can react with finishes. After finishing drying, I am now ready to fill in the lightning with the resin. I simply wipe the resin on across the face with the lightning, making sure to stay vigilant for air bubbles, which we will pop with a torch. We'll be sanding off the excess resin later after it cures. Now we're ready to sand off the excess resin. It's important to not oversand as we'll lose a lot of the detail from the lightning. We'll do the majority of the sanding here with the random orbital sander, which is much gentler. We'll climb from 40 grit to 120 grit to 240 grit just like we did before. We'll use the Crossguard as a stencil to draw lines for where it should meet the blade and handle. Now we'll sand down to where we drew the lines in the last step. Next, we'll grab our drill with the 5/16 inch drill bit and drill holes for the dowels. I'll start with the handle and drill 2 holes from where it will meet the crossguard. We'll space them about a 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch apart, but it doesn't need to be precise. Just keep the drill straight and drill the full length of the bit. We'll place the dowels in the drilled holes and use them to mark where to drill through the crossguard. Then we'll do the same for the blade. It's very important to keep the drill straight so that it doesn't poke through the side of the wood.
Invincible.
We'll clamp the handle so the dowel holes are vertical and fill it with some adhesive. I'm using resin, but wood glue will work fine. It can take some practice to get just the right amount in, but be sure that it fills up to the rim when the dowel is placed all the way in. If there's any excess dripping down the side, make sure to clean it off with a wet rag. Once that fully cures, we'll clamp the blade the same way and fill its dowel holes with adhesive, and insert the dowels from the hilt assembly. We're finally ready to apply the first coat of varnish. First, I'll brush out any dust buildup to allow for a nice clean coat. Then we'll apply the varnish in small amounts, careful not to apply too much and cause drips. I won't go in depth into varnish application techniques, as there are many videos on the subject already out there, but I will provide a few quick tips. Use long smooth strokes as opposed to short quick strokes. Don't apply too much at a time. Once you get hardened drips of varnish, it's hard to make it look perfect without starting all the way over. Be prepared to apply multiple coats, allowing it to dry between each. I generally do 4 coats, but many people will even do 8 or more coats. If you let it sit for too long between coats, refer to the jar's instructions, be sure to sand this surface with 220 grit sandpaper and brush off the dust. Clean your brush with mineral spirits between uses. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe for more. If you have any special requests for future videos, questions, or feedback, please let me know down in the comments below. And if this video gave you a taste for a more difficult woodworking project, be sure to check out my icosahedron tutorial. Stay fresh and we'll see you next time.